Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Let's talk a little bit about Nelson's book. This is I've read Nelson's book probably, a lot. If 80 is a number, then it's probably somewhere in there, maybe. I don't know. It's been a lot. We've done a lot of book studies around it. It's like anything else. It's a process that we want to understand and think about. And the more I read it, and it's funny because every time I read Nelson's book, it's always from a different perspective. Because I've grown in my thought process, I've grown with our conversation. So I'm looking at it and reading it, going, I never saw that before. I never caught that before. Because it's just through a different lens. It's so different than when I first read his book because I was focused on completely different things. Now I'm focused on something else because, again, it's just where you're at in your life and your travels. And when you read it, it's just going to be so much different. I appreciate you taking time today to go through this with me from your perspective as well as from my perspective, because I think this can be helpful for a lot of people that are going to listen to this, talking about the basic concept that Nelson talks about in becoming your own banker. And today, what I'd like to do is just touch on really the introduction to the 5th edition, page 3 of Nelson's book. It's just a funny story. You've heard it before. I read this book many times. And how many times did I skip over the introduction? And it's funny because that's what we do. We have introductions. Yeah, it's the introduction. Let me get to the meat of the matter. We were doing a book study a couple of years back, and somebody said, well, let's really take a deep dive in this introduction. This should take about 10 seconds. It took us, about 4 hours to go through a discussion about what was being said on this page. That's about a page and a half, a page and a quarter. It's not much. It took us a long time to dive through this. Hopefully today we're not going to go 4 hours into this, but I want to bring back some of the highlights I have, and I want to hear some of the highlights that you have from this introduction. I'll start real quick and just, as we get into reading the book, the introduction, what I find interesting, and I've underlined this and made many notes around this, is it says, Nelson said, this is not a sales tool for life insurance agents. This was written from Nelson's perspective for the consumer to help them understand. And so as a life insurance agent, I have to understand that what Nelson was really getting at, because this really shouldn't be a tool for us to sell to somebody. It's a tool to help people understand the thought process. This book is really that tool to help them understand the thought process and to understand that the best place to put dollars is into a contract that's entered in by free people. That was Nelson's belief system, is that the banking process should be done at the you and me level. What he meant by that is where we hold our capital and where we hold our money should be done at a contractual level through a life insurance policy at the you and me level through a mutual insurance company, because a mutual insurance company represents just its policyholder. You have a policy with an insurance company. I have a policy with that same insurance company. If you succeed, that means I succeed. And so when I need a loan, I'm coming to you and all the other policyholders wanting a loan, and I'm willing to pay some interest on it, because we all want that same success. And we don't want somebody getting a deal, because if somebody gets a deal, then that means somebody else is having to pay for it. So we all want to be on the same page. And I think there's been a lot of misinformation in the insurance industry as a whole about what the purpose of a policy is. So right. That was where I got the first paragraph or the first part of that introduction. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to add to that, or.
Yeah, it's funny because I have that same sentence underlined or highlighted saying that it is not a sales tool for life insurance agents. And I think that was one of the first things that really made me go, because yeah. I did look at this as a sales tool. Originally, I looked at this and said, this is what they're trying to do, is just sell more life insurance. And I think a lot of people look at it that way. Yeah. So it's a tool, but it's not to sell more life insurance per se.
It isn't. Now, I want to make it real clear, though, and I think you would agree with this, is that we're still insurance people. We still wear a hat talking about the real benefit of death benefit. That doesn't make any sense. The benefit of having that death benefit in our life. But that's a different conversation. What we're talking about here is taking control of the banking function in our lives. And then once you understand that, then what is ultimately the best tool that we can be using? Right. So if we can, again, now this becomes that and asset that we've talked about in the past, right? This is the and asset that we're talking. That's going to kill two birds with one stone, as it were. And so I think that's important to have that understanding, is that we're not saying that the life insurance side of it, or the death benefit side of it, is bad. It's just a different conversation.
Yeah, and it says in that same paragraph that the industry has concentrated on the death benefit qualities. And so in the beginning, as you think about this being a life insurance policy, you naturally do think about it's life insurance. That's for somebody when they die, not what else can that policy actually do.
Right. Yeah. And again, that's, I think, a common misconception is that most people will look at this and go, oh, it's just about death. And Nelson's point was, if you understand what's going on, you'll know what to do. And part of that is that it has these benefits that you can use throughout your life. We are all going to graduate from this world. There's just no getting out of this thing alive. So that's an event that's going to happen. So we do have coverage for that. But what do we do from today until that happens? We have a tool that will allow us to take control of the banking function of our lives. And this is exactly what Nelson's saying in that paragraph. We have that ability to take control of that function. And we have the tool to use for that we can use between now and that graduation. And I think that's the beauty of it. So again, we're going to deal with that issue that's going to happen. Eventually that's going to happen. We're going to have to take care of that. But what do we do in the meantime? It's not a one-use product. It can be used multiple times in multiple different ways.
Yeah, it makes me think about the game Monopoly. And when I was a kid and would play Monopoly and you'd go and get your $200. And I would always stick the $200 away. I would stick it away for later use. But eventually you pull it out and use it, because if you really want to grow your wealth, you've got to use that money. You don't just let it sit there. You've got to go back to it. So it's kind of the same thing. If you've got the money there anyway, use it to help you grow your wealth, to help you grow other businesses, to help you grow financially in ways that you wouldn't have imagined before.
Taking advantage of opportunities and sheltering yourself from chaos.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the next part that was actually just in the next paragraph, he says, this book demonstrates that your need for financing during your lifetime is much greater than your need for protection. I think that's just what we talked about as well, is that we have a great need for financing throughout our lifetime. And I think he makes the point, and it's a little bit later than this, but he also goes back and really emphasizes the point that we finance everything we do. That's his point. Either you give up interest or you pay up interest. So those are the two forms of finance.
Yeah, and it is it's a very simple concept. It's very difficult to wrap your head around that. At least it was for me. It's very difficult to wrap my head around that. It was, because you think about so much information that you hear out there is just pay cash for everything. Don't have debt, don't go into debt. You just want to pay cash. And so people think about that cash, the value at that moment. They don't think about when they're paying cash, they're actually giving up all the other things that cash could be doing for them.
100%. And I really believe that's a consumer mindset, right? That's a mindset of, hey, I'm going to consume this and then move on to the next thing. It's like focused, right? Where should we be having a discussion about, we can consume part of it, but we need to be planting seeds to grow more in the future. But it's the consumer mindset. We probably take the most valuable asset we have, which is cash or whatever the case is, and we give it to somebody else, and then we don't account for it. And so successful businesses understand that all cash has all cash has value. And it's probably the most valuable asset you can have, because it allows you to take control or take advantage of opportunity. If you don't have cash, then you depend on somebody else to give you access to money, access to this pool of money that will allow you to take advantage of those opportunities. So it's just one of those things where, again, it goes back to the consumer mindset versus a business mindset. If you understand what's going on and realize that you do finance everything you do, that's going to be the real key. Also on that portion that you wanted to highlight, just from your perspective.
No, we just barely touched on it.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it, but I think that's why this turns into a 4-hour conversation just on this page and a quarter. So we're just trying to highlight some of the basic points around it. And again, when people have questions, that means that their mind is thinking. I think that's a great opportunity to say, let me engage with somebody that understands this, or at least has a better understanding than I do of this. And then later on that, probably a couple of paragraphs down there, he reemphasizes the fact that it's written for the layman and not for financial advisors. But all life insurance should be thoroughly knowledgeable of its content and practice. And this is where I see a lot of people think they know they know something that they don't know. And that's what is, quite frankly, is a little bit dangerous versus somebody that says, I have studied this. I have worked with a mentor. I have worked with people that's just focus and teach on this particular subject. And that gives you that expertise versus somebody that thinks they know something that's just not true. So it goes back to working with somebody that is certified, working with somebody that has gone through the process of education and challenging their belief system. I think that's really what education is. We have a belief system and we've been challenged to either defend it or to say, hey, maybe what I was thinking is not quite right. Let me take a step back and see how this truly fits. And that's where I think working with somebody that's obviously been certified, anybody, your brother Bob, that says, hey, I can do that for you. Again, that's because they're product focused and they're not process focused. So your thoughts on that or anything else you want to add that?
No, I think you summed it up quite well.
All right, what do you have next on the book?
The next thing that I have underlined is that it's not a procedure, and I mentioned this previously when we spoke. It's not a procedure to get rich quickly. To the contrary, it requires long-range planning. And so when you're looking at this, and people look at this and say, I could do better with just cash in the bank, or whatever their comment is, it's a process. And that's something that you and I you've had to beat me over the head with it multiple times. It's a process. It's a long-range process. This is not a one and done thing. This isn't something where, like the lottery, you get the winning lottery ticket, you go pick up your check, and it's all right there for you. It's a long-range process.
Yeah. And that is very common. I get that. I don't get that so much anymore because I think we have these discussions in advance. As people look at that, they can say, hey, I can do better in a cash account. I'm like, yeah, in the first couple of years you can, but what is it you're trying to accomplish? What do you want something better for today, tomorrow, and 40 years from now? Or are you just looking for something that's going to scratch that itch for the next year, maybe two? Yeah. And if it's, and I don't have a problem with talking with people who say, hey, I want a solution for 2 years from now. And I'll say, hey, that's great. I'm probably not the guy you need to work with because my focus and my belief is that it has to be a lot longer range than that because your problems aren't going to go away in 2 years or 3 years, right? It's this constant problem that's always going to be with us. But again, it goes back to some people aren't willing to engage in those three things we've talked about in the past, right? It takes time, money, and discipline. They don't want to invest time in the rest of their lives and have them apply that discipline for the rest of their lives as well. Right. So if that's the case, then that's fine. I've had many clients that we've had this discussion and they're not willing to, apply themselves or have the discipline, at least today. And what I've seen is actually interesting. I've been doing this long enough that people I've had discussion with 5, 6, 8 years ago are now coming back around because things have changed in their lives. It's about timing. You and I talked about that in the past too. It's about timing. And now they said, okay, I'm ready. I want to learn more. Yeah. So it's just a lot of times with just timing in your life. And they were appreciative of the fact that I said, I wasn't wanting to force them into something that they didn't want to do. My job is to educate people so they know what's going on. Because Nelson always made the comment. He says, people know what's going on, they'll know what to do. So my job is to teach people what's going on. They can either choose to accept it, engage with the conversation or not. And if not, then that's fine. They can find their own path. Yeah,
and I think that it's really important to remember that it isn't for everybody, and that's one of the benefits that we have, that we get to choose whether something is a good tool for us or not, whether that's different restaurants or whatever, different vehicles. This is a vehicle, and some people choose this vehicle because it fits for their lifestyle and it works, and they believe that this is what they need. And some people look at it and say, that's not the vehicle I want, and that's okay.
That's exactly right. Like I said, I believe this can benefit everyone, but not everyone's going to benefit from this just because they're not willing to choose and make those decisions. So, yeah, one of the things is actually a little earlier up in the chapters above what you just, and this goes back to that same discussion as Nelson wrote in the book. He says that this is not an investment of any kind. It's about how we finance things in our life, which can certainly include investments. Because I hear from clients that say, wow, I can do better in my investments. And I ask the question, compared to what? Right? Because their focus is not on what we're teaching. And so for some people, it's all about the investment and rate of return. And I'm not opposed to that. But what I'm trying to get across to people is what we're trying to get you to understand is that you finance everything you do in your life. Investments are no different. If you're going to take money, put in an investment, and you get a great rate of return, I would say, hey, that's great. But think about it from a business standpoint. If I'm going to start a coffee shop and I'm going to have a 20% rate of return on my coffee shop, and I borrow all the money from Wells Fargo, they're going to say, hey, that's great. You made 20% return on your investment, but we want our principal and our interest. Which, again, if I'm doing 20, 30, 50% in my coffee shop, why wouldn't I pay that back? Whatever that principal and interest is. So why do we treat our money any different than what we treat Wells Fargo's money?
Yeah, because we haven't ever thought about it like that.
Exactly. But that's the point Nelson was making there, is that you finance everything you do. And we're not talking about it. This is not an investment. This is a thought process. And where we store our money it's a storage of money. It's not an investment. The investment comes in your time and your discipline. That's where the investment comes. And then how you think about how can we grow money from that. So again, have I taken a policy loan to buy investments, quote unquote investments, stock position or something like that? Yeah, I've taken advantage of opportunities. There's been stock crash along the way that you, again, when you have cash, you can take advantage of those opportunities versus everybody else that is like having to sell because they need cash. That's the biggest difference.
Yeah.
And there was actually an interesting sentence in the book as well. He says, the process of banking goes on no matter what. It's a well-known fact that banks make money during times of low interest or high interest as well. It doesn't make any difference. The process of banking goes on no matter what. So the question you have to ask is, do you want to take control of that process? Because who always makes money? Those that control the financing, right?
Yeah. And if you think about it in terms of money is just a product. It is a commodity. It's a product. And when banks got started because people needed money, and so somebody had money that they could then loan them.
Right.
So they loaned the money, and then this whole banking system got started. That's a very simplistic explanation. But if we take that idea and we go, okay, we can be the bank because people, including ourselves, people still need money today for things. So now we can be the ones that control that money, and we can be the bank.
Yeah, exactly right. It's who's controlling that function. And you see it now more than we used to see it 15, 20 years ago. There's crowdfunding. So right. There are people out there going, hey, I want to do this business. They just throw it out to some crowdfunding sources, and people are willing to finance these things. That's probably the simplest version of banking. Again, the term banking probably has some negative connotations, and some regulators don't like the sound of that. But the point is, banking as a process, not as the business, right? So that's probably the simplest form of banking that there is. That you're taking control of this process by having access to cash, and then when you put it to work, you want to make sure it gets a reasonable rate of return on the way back.
Yeah.
That's all banking is. And then all we're talking about is now where are you storing your dollars, so you can have access to take control of that function. That's really what. Anything else you want to add to that?
I think that's good.
Well, one of the things, just to finish up this end of this thing, is that I want to touch on, and we'll be done here. And again, thanks to Nicole for joining. Is that this isn't a process that's designed to be a tax qualified idea of any sort. And I think a lot of people think that it is. It's a tax qualified process, and it's not. It's just a way. It has nothing to do, because all a tax qualified process is just the government giving you a break on the onerous taxes that they charge you. This idea, this concept has been around way longer than the current tax system. So the current tax system has been around since 1913. The idea of mutual insurance companies holding money has been around for 200 years. So it predates that well before that. And quite frankly, that's the discussion we never have, is that it's never designed around taking advantage of taxes, because that's always going to change. What's not going to change what you do with your dollars. Any last thoughts?
No, I appreciate this time with you today.
So. Well, yeah, it was fun. Like I said, I get pretty excited, pretty wound up about it. I would just have leave with one last note, is that this is a paradigm shift for people. Sometimes we're going to want to revert back to what we've been conditioned to think, but we just have to be persistent, understanding that, hey, where we want to go maybe isn't what we've been taught is how to get there. So maybe there's a better way. And that's really what we're talking about, is finding a better way. Because we want freedom, right? So ultimately what we want to teach our clients is how to get freedom, and that freedom to make some choices, right? Freedom from being told what to do with their money, or where we can put our dollars, or where we should invest them. So it's that freedom that we're searching for our clients and ourselves. All right, thank you so much for your time, and we'll continue this series, and we'll hopefully have some more insight into what Nelson was writing in his book.
Good. Thanks so much, Wade. I appreciate this.
You bet.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested,
Please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.